Everyone, my name is Miss Piccini and welcome to AP Psychology. We will be doing flipped class videos. So this is your first video. We've talked about it in class, we've read about it, and so now we're ready to get started with Unit 1, History and Approaches. So the first thing we need to talk about, because we're taking psychology, is what is psychology? Psychology is a really unique course in that you've taken history, you've taken English and science for many years since you were in elementary school, since you were in kindergarten, but you have most likely never taken a psychology class before. That's why this is an intro class, but that's also why we really need to think about what psychology really is. There's a lot of misconceptions out there, and I hate to disappoint you if you think this whole class is about mental health, because that's just one component of what psychology is and what we study with it. That's definitely an important part, but in Intro to Psych, we study everything that is psych. So, what is that? So we define psychology as the science, very important, key term, the science of behavior and mental processes. So science, behavior, and mental processes. Those are the three key components to how we define psychology. Psychology is actually a very new science. However, there's info related to psychology, but it's not actually like scientific so much. Going back to ancient times. So there was Confucius who talked about it, Descartes who talked about the study of science and what we know and what we don't know. It's the whole thinking about the mind. And Aristotle thinking about what we know, and then Francis Bacon. I'm sure you might remember him from science class with the scientific method, and saying that really if we want to know things, we need to study them, we need to experiment. If we don't, we can't know anything just because we think we know. And that will come up later. Like, we can't just use common sense. We need to empirically study it or use scientific methods to study. Early psychology. So now this is when we're formally in the field of psychology. So it started out with, in 1879, with Wilhelm Wundt. It's fun to say. So clearly German. And he created his first psych lab in Germany. Studied with him, and he went to the United States, Johns Hopkins University, and created the first psych lab in the United States. So soon after this, various different branches of psychology came up, like behaviorism comes up, and cognitive, and all these other ones. And we'll talk about those soon. But what I want you to know is in the very beginning, with Wilhelm Wundt and Stanley and Edward Titchener and William James, these are all the very early people, they broke into two groups. So there were the first group was the structuralist group. So Edward Titchener was kind of the founder of that, and he said the purpose of psychology is to identify the basic elements of the conscious mind. So what makes up our conscious mind? And he said that we do this by using introspection, meaning asking us questions. When were you aware that the penny hit the table? So how many seconds? But that, requires a lot of introspection. It requires the people you are experimenting with to be very verbal and very aware of their thoughts and feelings. And sometimes we're not always accurate about our thoughts and feelings. So that is why structuralism some people broke off from it and created what's known as functionalism. So if you think of functional as like it serves a purpose, right? It's functional, right? These people, these scientists believe that the purpose of psychology was to figure out why our mind does what it does. How does it help us understand our world around us? So a similar question, but it's just kind of put in a different way. How does it help us understand and interpret our environment? And so William James, who's a big name in psychology, he was the founder of functionalism. So it's kind of like the backlash to structuralism. So as psychology evolved, it broke into several different perspectives. So again, we have all of our early thinkers. We have Wilhelm Wundt with the first psychology lab in Germany. We have Edward Titchener founding structuralism. We have William James founding functionalism. And of course, we have Sigmund Freud, who I'm sure if you were to know any psychologist, that would be the one that you would know. And he kind of works from that introspective way with just kind of saying things as you think them. So on this slide, you can see that I have some of the different perspectives. So we're going to go over these in class and do some activities with them, but these will come up every unit. They're really important, but they'll also be reinforced every unit. So after the early thinkers and Freud, all that introspective, just tell me what you're thinking, and it requires a lot of verbal, like I said, and a lot of introspective thought. In the 1920s, they said, that's not really scientific. We can't, take someone's word for what they're feeling and what they're hearing and when, or seeing and when. We need empirical data. So they dismissed all that previous stuff as unscientific and said, in order for it to be scientific, it must be observable. And the only thing that is observable is behavior. So this is what started behaviorism. So why do people do what they do? And trying to help people change their behaviors for positive reasons. So a big name to remember with behaviorism, and again, this will come up, so don't worry too much about this name because he will come up a lot more. John B. Watson, and from here, there's many more perspectives too. Like I said, we'll go over them. So psychology as a science is less about a set of findings than a way of asking and answering questions. So psychology as a science is less about a set of findings. So we're not giving you answers, but it's a way of thinking and a way of investigating and researching and discovering. So in your reading, they talk about what is a fundamental question in psychology, and that is nature or nurture. And the question is, what influences us more? Who we are, how we behave, how we think. Is it nature, which means our genetics, or is it nurture, our environment, our family, our school, our culture, our state, country, all of that? So what's the answer? Do you think it's all 100% our DNA? We're just who we are because of our biological parents? Or are we who we are 100% because of our environment? And so they went back and forth a lot on this question, and they still do. And it kind of depends on what we're talking about. But overall, they say that they work together. So you're born with these set of traits. You are genetically predisposed to certain things, and you come with certain DNA. And then your nurture, your environment, might allow some of those things to occur, or it might not. For example, you can be genetically predisposed to anxiety, meaning it runs in your family, and you picked up that nice little DNA trait. However, it doesn't mean that you will for sure have anxiety. It just means that you are more likely to. So it's like, here's an egg. An egg can become a part of a cake, but it doesn't mean it will become a cake, right? So given the right environment, an egg can become a part of a cake. Given the right environment, your genetic predisposition for anxiety can become anxiety. So this little, what you're looking at here, this flow chart is every unit all the time, super important, and honestly not that hard. So there you go. So there are 3 major components to psychology always in everything that we do in behavior or thinking. And those are our biological influences, so that genetic aspect that we just talked about. And then there are the psychological aspects. So this is the way that we think, our temperament, our belief systems, our experiences from previous situations that are similar, and then our sociocultural influences. So family, school, friends, religion, all of that stuff. So all of that together really makes each individual. And that's why everyone is different, because you don't have the same experiences as everyone else. Even if you're in the same family, the way you experience things is different. Unless you're an identical twin too, you're different genetically. So you might have some things that someone else in your family doesn't. So all of these things kind of play a role in why we are who we are. And then here's some things like, Aristotle said that everything comes from nurture. Plato was like the opposite, saying that it's all about our genetics. And then John Locke said we are a blank slate. You might be familiar with that. So all kind of different back and forth on that. So bottom line, nurture works on what nature endows. Nurture works on what nature endows. So again, I'm not going to go over these right now, but if you want to look back in these slides and pause this later, these are the 7 perspectives that you need to know. This chart right here only has 6 of them on here because it does not have evolutionary. Sometimes that one gets left out, but you do have to know all 7. So when we're talking about working in psychology, there is basic psychology and there is applied psychology. So basic takes, it basically builds on the knowledge base. What can we learn about how people behave and their mental processes? So they study development, they experiment with how we think, feel, act in different situations. They could become like an educational psychologist and study influence on teaching and learning, or looking at social psychology, how we view and affect one another. In the applied research fields, they use psychology, so the knowledge base, they use that knowledge base to tackle practical problems out in the world. So they might go into a corporation and look at how, what the management wants and what the employees want, and try to find a way to make more productivity, happier workers, all that kind of stuff. That's the industrial organizational psychologist. They might be a counselor or a clinical psychologist or a psychiatrist. And that will come up a lot, psychiatrist versus psychologist. Psychiatrist is the one who can prescribe meds. That is the doctor. The psychologist, the counselor, is the one who does talk therapy and stuff like that, but does not prescribe medicine. So that's the big difference between the two. Okay, so what we have done today is we have gone over the key parts of Unit 1 together. We will remember that we did not really talk about all those 7 perspectives, because that's really something that I have some tricks for you in class, and you're going to do some reading on it, but we will go over those. So the pre-scientific roots of psychology, early psychologists, the growth of it into different perspectives and branches, and then the three aspects of psychology: the biological, psychological, sociocultural, and then the different types of work within psychology. So I hope you enjoyed this first video, and I look forward to talking to you more about it in class. Thanks.